This is the Body Talks with Vera, where we dive deep into movement, strength, and joy at every size. I'm Vera, your host, and each episode we're having real conversations with people who are redefining fitness, confidence, and what it truly means to live in our bodies. Whether we're talking powerlifting, nutrition, running ultra marathons, or radical self love, this is a space where every body has a story. So we're going to get into it today. We have the founders of Body Kind Nutrition, Eleni Levine and Ashantis Jones. Body Kind Nutrition is a meal preparation program and community that supports people with gentle nutrition from a weight-inclusive approach. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. We are so excited to be here and to connect with you. And also, we're just excited to connect with you in real life again.
Yes, I love that. I'm so happy because, of course, we've all spoken a little bit before, and I am always just so thrilled to see both of your lovely faces on camera and just even online in the social media sphere. So I'd love for you both to kind of just share your own personal journeys and what led you to come together to create Body Kind Nutrition.
Hi, friends. So, as Vera said, my name is Ashantis. I use she and they pronouns, and I am a pre licensed therapist, certified personal trainer, group fitness instructor, and use all of that professional background to also work as an intersectional wellness educator. And so, with that in mind, Eleni and I first met just because we were mutuals on TikTok. And then I was on her podcast, All Bodies Nutrition podcast. And after we had a couple of just, I don't know, friendly FaceTimes and conversations, we were like, there's such a lack of support when it comes to how to eat when you are trying to do it from a weight inclusive lens. There is a lot of support that exists within the weight loss space that doesn't exist in the same ways in the recovery space or just generally in the weight inclusive space. And I don't think it's because folks don't find it important, but rather there's not one common goal to rally around, one common enemy, if you will, in the same way. And so we decided to put our little brains together and figure out how to create a place that is holistic. And so we're talking about mental health, we're talking about fitness, we're talking about nutrition. And we're doing this because those are also the things that are within our scopes of practice. Me as a fitness professional and as a therapist, look at all of the things mental health and fitness related. And then Eleni can obviously dive into the nutrition things because that's her scope of practice.
Yes. Hi, guys. My name is Eleni. I am a weight inclusive registered dietitian. I have been practicing as a dietitian for almost 10 years now, which is, I know, insane because it's insane to me. I can't believe it. But yeah, I started in this field as someone who was taught to teach intentional weight loss. That is how I was taught in undergrad, during my master's, during my dietetic internship, and intentional weight loss was everything. And as I started my career working in an inpatient facility, in a clinical setting, I dealt with a lot of patients that were very sick and had a lot of chronic things going on, acute things going on, things like that. And so when I transitioned to working in an outpatient setting, I was recognizing that a lot of people were coming to the office and they had concerns such as high blood pressure, prediabetes, diabetes, heart disease, chronic illnesses, you name it. And everyone was so obsessed with the scale. Meanwhile, as I was asking them questions about what their day looked like in terms of food and things like that, I noticed that so many people were experiencing disordered eating, and a lot of what they had thought was kind of the answer to handling their health issues was through restriction, whether it was through calorie restriction, whether it was through macronutrient restriction. And I was kind of like, okay, people, this is not going to work. Clearly, this is not getting us anywhere. And so that's kind of when I started to steer away from using weight as a tool in terms of a metric of success. And that was, I would say, probably 2017, 2018. And so that's where, in terms of my philosophy of nutrition, came about. And so in terms of how we have made body kind nutrition, a focus of actual gentle nutrition, but without the like diety, intentional weight loss kind of stuff. So one of the misconceptions that a lot of people who don't necessarily understand what weight inclusive or anti-diet nutrition is that we don't care about health. We don't care about nutrients. We don't care about these things. And that actually couldn't be further from the truth. And so in terms of our recipes, specifically for the meal prep portion, we focus on things like fiber and protein, which are two important, I would say, nutrients as are carbohydrates and everything else. But I find that if we focus on, let's say, quantifying carbohydrates, it tends to feel a little bit triggering for people if they have experienced eating disorders or disordered eating. And so we don't talk about calories, don't talk about those things, but we do give an estimate for protein and fiber because I think it's important for us to all get a good amount in. And fiber is kind of like one of those nutrients that not a lot of people really focus on. So that's why we like to focus on that.
I love that. And so I have a couple things to say on that. Like, I love that the two of you came together, one through TikTok, because I feel like that's where I found both of you originally too. Like, what a place to come together. But I love that, like, Ashantis, you have this background in mental health and in fitness, but then Eleni, you have this background in nutrition. So bringing all those three kind of components together is like, the best thing I think you can do. But I also love, the topic of, not really pointing out like calories in these recipes that you are giving to people who are signing up to this community, because I think, yeah, it can be super triggering. And I think, calories is a tricky thing in general because, the restaurants and menus all have like that calorie limit thing. And, then we immediately start going to that diet culture mindset. But to have numbers and rough numbers on fiber or protein, I think is very helpful because I do know I've been reading a lot recently, like people are really lacking in fiber. And I'm like, oh, I probably am too. So I do really love that. And, you brought up the term gentle nutrition, and I'd kind of love to talk about what gentle nutrition means to you both and how it differs from that traditional nutrition advice.
So I love this question, and I feel like gentle nutrition is like the theme of the year. I feel like something that I leaned into last year was really kind of taking back the nutrition aspect of counseling and recovery and my content because I feel like I said, the social media space has so many positives because here we are. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for social media, and I wouldn't have met both of you. But also the fact that there's so much misinformation and this obsession with calories and this and that. And it's kind of silly to me why we're still focusing on something that we know hasn't actually proved to help anyone. Because you can intentionally lose weight through eating cookies all day. Now, I'm not saying that you can't eat cookies all day if that's what you want, but I think eventually your body would be like, hey, maybe I need some more vegetables, fruits, some protein, things like that. And so really the concept of gentle nutrition is employing medical nutrition therapy recommendations. So for example, if you are someone who has elevated blood sugar levels, whether you're pre-diabetic, diabetic, or if you are someone who has polycystic ovary syndrome like I do myself, that is something that is into consideration. And so instead of focusing on the weight aspect, we focus on what the actual research shows. And we know that diets high in fiber help people better manage their blood sugar levels. So that's an example of gentle nutrition without being like too diety, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll add that in my practice, both as a therapist that primarily supports people with eating disorder recovery or disordered eating recovery, as well as a trainer, it's so hard for folks to disconnect the actual behavior from the numbers. And I think that gentle nutrition allows us the opportunity to say, what can I add to what I'm having versus why do I have to always subtract something? Because the reality is we know that when folks go through restrictive behaviors, that can be specific to food, but it usually is happening in so many other places in their lives where it's just simply not necessary. And being able to add, though, these things that you're doing and take care of yourself, now it's like you're giving yourself a little gold star every time you eat a carrot. That's way more iconic.
Yeah, I've just like the idea of a gold star. I'm like, yeah, it's like a dopamine boost for taking care of yourself in that gentle way. And I just really appreciate to know that you're really backing this all with the actual science behind it because, you know, I'm not in the nutrition world, but in the fitness world, of course, a lot of people love to just like pull things out of a hat and there's no science to back it. Like, for example, I recently did a bunch of research on posture for a workshop, and I literally could not find one scientific study that actually proved that an upright posture is the quote unquote best posture. Like, there's actually nothing to prove that, but yet it is the kind of standard that has been around for, thousands of years, literally. And so it's just refreshing to know that you're focusing on, being kind to yourself and adding what you need and not, restricting and saying, oh, like, I can't do that. I can't do this, like all that kind of stuff. But like, here's also the science to show like you can add these things in to make sure it feels good for you. So I'd love to know, how does Body Kind Nutrition approach meal preparation in a way that supports body trust rather than restriction?
So I think that honestly is highlighted in what we just spoke about in the sense that we're adding things versus subtracting them. But also, one of the things we specifically do with our recipes in our meal prep program is also include low energy swaps. I myself am chronically ill. I have fibromyalgia, I'm ADHD, I'm autistic. I got a lot going on, okay? And there are days where I'm like, if I have to cut up the mirepoix, I will not be eating. Or if I have to chop the bell pepper, it's not going down. But we're doing things like reminding people you can buy the pre-diced mirepoix. You can buy the pre-diced bell peppers. You can get the frozen sweet potatoes versus getting a fresh sweet potato and going through all the trouble of cutting it up yourself. Oh, you want to cut it up yourself? Okay, that's fine. But also, did you know there's this little chopper that Ashantis lives by, because I do, and you could buy one for yourself too if you think that it's good for you, right? There are alternative ways to get the things done, and it may be different than what a lot of mainstream advice is. But if we're being honest, the only reason that's the advice is because somebody is trying to make $1. No, not all aspects of Body Kind Nutrition are free. We still live under capitalism. We have bills to pay. However, we do attempt to put as much free content as possible out there for folks because we know this information is simply inaccessible. And so when you're able to build a relationship with nutrition that is from a place of abundance and from a place of support and self-care, that is increasing body trust the same way. Being able to trust that you can actually do the lunge allows you to get up off the floor a little bit easier. Being able to trust when you look in your reflection in the mirror and you say something kind to yourself and you know you mean it, all of those things are creating more trust with your body and self.
Yes. First of all, I'm gonna need to know which food chopper you are using because I do need a new one. But, I think it's wonderful that you're even just like allowing people to realize that they have the permission to, buy that pre-cut or that frozen thing. Because I know for me, like if I look at any cookbook I have, which I don't have a lot because most of the ones I've collected were when I was very entrenched in diet culture and not the greatest, but even those ones were all like, cut it yourself, do this. And it's like I have ADHD and like I don't have the energy for that half the time. I need something like I can grab immediately and that's it. Like I'm not going to spend all this time like doing all these different steps. Like if someone else wants to, amazing. I love that. But I personally cannot. So I love that you're offering just like that space to be like, no, like we can make it work for us in a way that we can. But I also really enjoy how, you're talking about not directly, but the community aspect of this. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but I do really enjoy like that you're offering these resources because they're inaccessible and as just a way to like inform your community and give them something to feel cared for, which I really enjoy and love. I would love to know, though, how do you balance nutrition education with the understanding that people have different relationships with food?
That's such a great question. Thank you for asking it. I think, for example, in March, right? We're in April now. Yeah. In March, it was National Nutrition Month. So our blog posts each week were focused on just giving very straight up nutrition education in terms of the main nutrients. So, like carbohydrates, protein, fat, and really doing it from a neutral, more sciencey based so that whoever was reading it would be able to use like their own experience to interpret it and decide for them how they wanted to utilize that information. We didn't give any specific recommendations or, oh, you should have this much or that much, or if you have this much, it's too much. The only thing that we did focus on was, like, for example, signs and symptoms that you might not be getting enough carbohydrates or fats or protein or micronutrients and things like that. And so that's our approach overall in terms of the nutrition education that we've been putting out, is so that people can be informed and then use their own kind of judgment and experience to see how it works best for them. And does that mean every single thing that we talk about will be 100% relatable to every single person? No, of course not, because we all have a lot of different things going on. And so we just try to provide stuff that people can find useful, and it might even get them to be curious about maybe looking into more education or checking out our personal social media posts and see a lot of the things that we talk about are also on there as well. So that's the approach that we've been having.
I really enjoy that. And, just to be able to, again, giving people that freedom to, they have the information, now they can interpret that and use that information in a way that feels really good for them, which I really appreciate you both doing that. I think both of you can really touch on this from, a mental health standpoint and just also disordered eating standpoint too. But how does mental health intersect with nutrition, and how are you addressing that through Body Kind Nutrition?
Yes. So, as some people may know, and if you don't, that's totally, you're about to learn it. Eating disorders are a mental health condition. And so, there are specific diagnostic criteria that folks are supposed to be able to essentially attain in order to get that diagnosis. And so, that comes through the DSM-5, which is how all mental health diagnoses technically are supposed to take place. I say technically because every country is a little bit different. So and I know this is like Canadian and American audience, but utilizing the DSM-5, we then would go through and say these are all of the folks' symptoms. That means they do have anorexia, binge eating disorder. Orthorexia is not in the DSM-5, but is a diagnosis that I think a lot of weight inclusive therapists and registered dietitians are aware of and maybe are not able to technically diagnose, but certainly can treat. And that intersection really exists because we are all creatures of habit. And so everything is repetition. We're constantly learning. And sometimes we learn really great habits, and sometimes we don't learn really great habits. And so for most people, when it comes to food, because we live in an anti-fat society and there's, connections between food and politics and body size and race and all of these other identities and marginalizations that make up our world, we will maybe be feeling the weight of being racialized, but I'm not feeling the feeling because I don't feel safe to feel it. I don't know how to feel it. I don't know how to process it. So instead, I'm restricting my food. And that obviously is going to cause problems for folks because the reality is we need food in order for our bodies to function. And while there are plenty of doctors who would say, I'd rather you eat nothing than eat bad processed food, the reality is your body's going to shut down if you eat absolutely nothing for an extended period of time because it simply needs food to survive. And in the same way that we are finding ways to make small shifts in folks' behavior, make small shifts in their internalized beliefs of self, of society, we're also allowing them to maybe look in the mirror and smile, maybe look in the mirror and not frown, right? Maybe it won't always be a smile, but it doesn't have to be a frown, and it doesn't have to be a full breakdown with tears and shame and guilt and all of these things. Shame and guilt are emotions, but the amount of shame and guilt that individuals feel about themselves is truly baffling. And as I've continued in this work as a mental health professional, I have come to realize that it is so important to be talking about the systemic pieces of this, because without that, folks really do think it's 100% on their shoulders. But we know realistically, because of social determinants of health, people really only have like a 30-ish% control in what their health status is. But we don't treat it like that. We treat it as if people have 100%. And there's a huge difference between 300. So that's my take. I'm sure Eleni has more thoughts.
Yes, 100% to all of that. The other part that I think I would add is that for the most part, if someone is struggling with a level of their mental health and their relationship with food, it is very likely that this chronic undereating exacerbates a lot of these conditions and a lot of how you're feeling in your body and a lot of how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis. And so one of the things that we like to promote the most in terms of the meal prep aspects of the community, as well as the community in general, is that everyone needs to eat. Everyone needs to eat enough. And so that's really in terms of, for example, the recipes, we give like an estimated amount per 4 servings per recipe, but it could be more or less depending on you and what you need. And so I find that in terms of the work that I do with my individual patients, is that the first step of healing is just eating enough and eating enough consistently for a long period of time. And I don't mean 1 week or 2 week. I'm talking about months and months, because when your body is in this consistently, if you would say like a deficit in terms of energy, your body is really smart and it knows what to do with food. And if you are not giving it enough, it's going to just slow down and it's going to shut down and it's going to slow down your metabolism. It's going to slow down a lot of other things going on. Hormones and hormone regulation is a big role in terms of adequate intake, as well as adequate fat intake and micronutrient intake. So it all goes hand in hand. But I think that one of the main thoughts behind this whole concept is really just everyone needs to eat enough.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's something I've only really learned recently about that most of us are really under eating. And I didn't realize until like a few, maybe even just 2 years ago, I was like, oh, I'm really under eating. Like I am not getting enough of anything really. And it's so disheartening to sometimes, be in like a social media group or something. And there is still talk of dieting and weight loss. And there's people saying like, I'm only eating, under 1,000 calories. Why aren't I losing anything? And these kind of topics where it's just kind of breaking my heart really to see like, oh no, like I think as a society needs to do better when it comes to education on that, especially because, so many people are still entrenched in this idea of we have to be restricting, we have to be eating as little as possible. And then, yeah, blaming it on ourselves wholly when, you just said, Ashantis, like it's 30-ish%. Like I didn't even know that. I definitely would have thought it was still more. I would have been like 60%, 70%, it's on me, which is wild. And I'd love to talk actually a little bit about that and that those systematic barriers that make intuitive eating and body trust more difficult, especially for marginalized communities.
Yeah. So one, I'll say that 30-ish% is based off the American system. It may be slightly different elsewhere because we have such bad healthcare. That really is a big reason why we are stuck under that 30%. Because the reality is most people in America do not have adequate access to medical care. So many people here utilize our emergency room system as their primary care system, or utilize our urgent care system as their primary care system. Not only that, most people here don't make enough money to really be able to afford food. And even if they can afford food, what is accessible to you? I live in Chicago, Illinois, for instance. Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the country. And you can see that as you go from the north side slowly towards the south side of the city, and as you go from the east side of the city slowly towards the west side of the city. Now, who do you think lives in the south and west sides of the city? Predominantly Black and brown folks. And the options as far as grocery stores, you may have to actually go 2-3 miles. Most people here don't drive. Most people use public transit. Okay, so now you have to get on public transit with all of your groceries. What if you also are coming home from school? So you're also carrying and you carry all of that? Is that possible? You want to bring your cart on the bus, but it's rush hour. Like, the bus driver not really trying to let you on with a cart, right? You can't necessarily afford an Uber to get from the grocery store to your house, possibly. There's just so many different things that come up, particularly within the individual systems of America, that really don't allow us to care for ourselves the way that we should. Because even if we do have access to the things, can you find a provider that isn't ableist? Can you find a provider that isn't a sexist? Can you find a provider that isn't racist? Because most American doctors truly believe Black people feel more pain than non-Black people, because that is what was being taught in our medical schools. So I can't even be completely mad at this person because that's what they were taught when they got free. So it's important, I think, for us to include and understand the intersectionality that folks may be bringing into this recovery space, whatever that process looks like for them, because it's going to make a difference in how they're able to interact with things. So when we water it down to just eat the cookie, just eat the donut, just have a salad whenever you want, and not really talk about all of the other pieces that are included, that's when marginalized folks are like, okay, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do, because one doctor told me he'd rather me not eat than eat processed food. But then this other person is telling me to just eat a donut. But is a donut going to give me the energy that I need to actually get through my entire workday? Possibly not, depending on your job. It's far more nuanced, far more complex.
Yes, 1,000%. That's literally how I respond to everything that Ashantis says, even in our private meetings. But I think this is part of a bigger conversation. So in terms of when we look at nutrition specifically, the recommendations and the way that most dietitians have been educated has come from a very whitewashed, white supremacy lens. And so when we talk about counseling people who maybe are from different cultures than we are, or different lived experiences than we might have, it is very harmful, and it is continuously harmful for individuals to make judgments on people based on their cultural foods, based on their experiences, based on how the patient potentially views food. And so, for example, like when we talk about avocado, right? When we think of avocado and nutrition, a lot of people might think of like, oh, putting avocado in your smoothie or avocado toast. But avocado plays such a huge role in many indigenous communities. And when you pull back everything and then just place this concept of, oh, one is good and one is bad, it's very harmful. And I've seen this time and time again. I think it was like last year or the year before. There was this girl, she was white, she was a dietitian, and I think she was a new dietitian. She looked very young. And she basically made this video on TikTok where she was saying that salsa wasn't a vegetable. And it was really insane to me because I don't understand objectively how someone would come to that conclusion. But the way that she was ostracizing Latin culture and South American culture by saying that like their foods were unhealthy and that people eat them on cheat days, it was just really harmful. And it was like literally everything that I just said boiled down to this one person's video. And that's how it's all over the country, and I'm sure all over the world. And it's super, super harmful. So that is one aspect. And the other aspect I would touch on is when we talk about food insecurity and also lack of availability. That plays a huge role in the development of eating disorders. and disordered eating. And I could do a whole hour talking just about that, but I think it's also really important to touch on that. And it's something that I've seen many times throughout my practice where a lot of patients' individual experiences led for them to feel this need to, whether it's hoard food, overeat food, binge food, whatever, however you want to refer to it as, and it really comes from their experience.
Definitely. And, it makes me think of so many different things, but I initially think of like food deserts. And as you're both talking, all I can think is, are there even food deserts outside of North America? Like, I have to wonder because it's not something I've looked into. So I really don't know the answer to that. But if I ever think of food deserts, I do think of in Canada or in the United States. It's somewhere in Europe. Like, you don't hear about it even like in other continents. Like, it's just here where we deal with these kind of issues, which is so harmful to us, literally harmful to us.
I can say in terms of food deserts in New York, for example, I have patients that are across the country, and depending on where they are, this can be something that they experience. But you wouldn't think in New York City, right? When you think of New York City, you think of like the food mecca of the world, if you will. And so I have had many patients over the years where they live in, for example, Jamaica, Queens, which is like near all the subways and the bus stations, but there are communities within that area where there are only convenience stores and fast food. And for you to go to a supermarket, it's like miles and miles away. And so what Ashantis said before is that if you are a parent and you have children and you have to get on a bus to, a 45-minute bus ride to go and get groceries from a supermarket where it's more affordable than what is at the convenience store, you have to make certain decisions for you and your family, because not only do you have to bring your kids if you don't have childcare, but also transporting everything back. It's a lot, and it puts a lot more burden on the individual. And that is just one example that I could think where maybe people wouldn't recognize that is considered a food desert. Not that there isn't food available. It's just fresh fruits and vegetables, even frozen fruits and vegetables, isn't really available. And whatever is available in like the local small convenience stores are very expensive.
Yeah, it's the quality too.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree with you on the quality piece. And I'll actually add that something I've been attempting to change in my own language is that thinking of it less as a food desert and actually more food apartheid. And understanding that language is actually so important, because the reality is it's purposeful, unfortunately. And then in some ways, I think it's really important to speak about the fact that it's on purpose, because it doesn't have to be this way. We choose to make it this way. Again, particularly in the American context, we produce enough food to feed everybody. We produce enough food to feed everybody, whether it's being produced specifically in the States and then shipped in or not. In our grocery stores, there is enough food for everybody to eat. But we choose to throw a lot of our food into the trash before it has gone bad, because many of our corporations would rather the bread go in the trash and nobody be able to have access to it than possibly give it away for free. And that is malicious. And I think it's so important as providers to really name that, because again, people feel so much individualized shame and guilt around being food insecure, or they feel so much shame and guilt around maybe not necessarily following their body's cues of needing some kale because they don't have any kale around them. They can't get it. And they're like, sorry, you're going to have to deal with the lettuce I can get from this burger from this fast food joint. That's the best we can do. But I think it's so important because far too often individuals believe it's their fault when it is not. This is a system that was built this way purposefully to marginalize people, because if we can make you feel like you have to use your labor in order to have all of your basic needs met, then there will be a semblance of control.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And first of all, thank you for even pointing that out, because I never even considered, but it is 100% a food apartheid. Like, I think when I think of desert, I think, yeah, it's something that we can't fix. But, if we think of the indigenous communities up north in northern Ontario or Flint, Michigan, where neither places are getting clean water. And like, we can get them clean water. People are just choosing not to. And I do think, yeah, it's exactly the same thing with the food. And, I just remembered another thing I wanted to bring up was I have a friend of mine here who's a physiotherapist, and I'm going to make sure I bring her onto this show too. But she went back to India recently with her family, and every single photo was just of these rows of fresh fruits and vegetables. And, right before she left, she went with me to an Indian grocery store and she was pointing out all these like different vegetables. And I'm like, I've never seen a single one of these in the grocery stores I go to because they are like, the big box store grocery stores or even just convenience stores. I don't see that there. I don't see like the variety that, other countries have access to and that they are importing into our countries, but we're just not seeing it or choosing not to because we're so almost really in a silo of this is the type of vegetable or fruit we should eat. So we shouldn't look elsewhere. And, I also think I'm really happy there's what I've been seeing a lot online and on TikTok are foragers. Oh, I can't remember her name right now. I know both of you definitely know what I'm talking about. But yes, tell me her name because it's going to bug me. But she does a lot of foraging and her TikToks are so not even inspirational, but educational on, hey, look at this like root or this type of thing. Here's how we can cook it. And here's how we can get nutrients in a way that is accessible to us in that way, because that is how we used to do it back when we were hunter-gatherers.
That's so important. And I think that is another great example of how powerful and amazing social media can be. Even though a lot of these big companies are horrible, but bringing people together and recognizing. And so it's actually really interesting, not that it's on the same level of what we're talking about, but as someone who lives in New York, there is I'm very fortunate where I've always had a lot of cultures around me, a lot of religions around me, a lot of food around me. We have a lot of different, whether it's an Indian grocery store, an Asian grocery, like we have all those different things. And so I've been very fortunate to have that, but I have recognized that through working with people across the country and even just talking in this example is that a lot of people aren't familiar with these things. And so oftentimes when you're not familiar with something, you feel afraid of them. And you're like, oh, wait, I don't know what that is. That looks weird or things like that. And so I think that's just another great example of how we can learn from one another and really be able to understand different cultures and the importance of food and how their cooking processes are different and how much we can learn and incorporate different practices within our own homes.
Yeah. And of course, if you're watching the YouTube, I just made like a face because Ashantis just wrote that it's Alexis Nicole, and I will be putting Alexis's TikTok in the show notes. But I got really excited by that. But to Eleni, on your point, like, yeah, like I really agree. And I think so for me, I do live in Toronto, which is considered the most, I was reading not too long ago, it is the most multicultural city in at least North America. And I grew up in the suburbs, though, which was a mostly white area. So, yeah, that fear of, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. I don't know how to eat it. I'm just gonna not, which, also is my mom to a T. She refuses to try new food. I tried having her have ramen on my birthday and she really wanted Burger King instead. She would not do it. So I totally get that. And yeah, there's a fear. And I think, you know, we have to work and we as like a whole have to work to kind of destigmatize like just different cultures and different foods because yeah, like we can get these nutrients in so many different ways if we're looking outside of, that very rigid box. And I'd love to switch just a little bit because I think it's still along the same line. But what are the common food myths and misconceptions that you find yourselves debunking doing this work?
I love this question, and I could probably go on for 1,000 years talking about it. But I think one of the biggest ones that I think is universal is that a specific food, insert whatever food that is unhealthy. And this concept of you eat this one food and it automatically equals you're unhealthy or an unhealthy outcome. And I really blame a lot of people in diet culture and you name it, everything. Whoever started this, I really wish, I'm sure they're no longer living, but like I really wish that they would just go away because it's so harmful. And this concept of, oh, you're eating this, that's so unhealthy. What does that even mean? Like, what does that actually mean in terms of actual research and in a clinical implication? There has never been, ever in the history of research thus far, where we see a direct outcome where you eat one thing and then that is the exact result. And does that mean that every single person's body reacts the same exact way, eating the same exact things? No, we all have different things, social determinants of health, genetics, things that will express outcomes differently. But this concept of, oh, that's so unhealthy is just really, there's no actual scientific evidence that ever supports that statement.
Yeah, I will add more so on the personal training front. I would say this pops up where folks are like, okay, so if I want to be insert number here or waist measurement here, what do I need to be changing about my diet? And as we said earlier, a lot of times, are you even eating enough? Are you eating enough? That's my first question every time. What do you eat? Oh, you didn't eat anything before I work out today? Yeah, I ask my clients now, what have you had before we start a workout? Because if you tell me all you've 2 bananas, it's gonna be very different than if you tell me that you had avocado toast and a banana and like something like more substance literally in the volume. But the biggest myth I think is that things lose their nutritional value if you make them taste good. In the sense that I will often have people say, oh, I just want to get something light. So like, I'm just going to get this salad. And then it's like a bunch of veggies, a bunch of good, delicious veggies, and then olive oil and vinegar for the dressing. And don't get me wrong, I love a good vinaigrette. I can whip out a balsamic vinaigrette easy in my kitchen. And I also love a nice ranch situation on a buffalo chicken salad. I also love a nice poppy seed situation, right? And people go, I can't have that because it's too like taking away the nutritional value. You putting salad dressing on your salad does not take away the nutritional value that you're getting from eating your salad. Does it add, right? Is it an addition of things? You with bare lettuce versus lettuce that has dressing? Sure. But it doesn't automatically kill all of the nutrients inside of the lettuce. And I don't know how we got there.
Yeah, and okay, it just immediately makes me think back to when I was working a desk job. This person came up beside me, brought out her lunch, and it was just plain chicken. And there was not a single seasoning, not salt, not pepper, nothing. And I looked at her and I said, "What is that?" She's like, "Oh, it's just chicken. Like, I'm really trying to bulk up right now." And I said, "You can put seasoning on it." And she said, "No, no, I can't. Like, it's gonna like devalue the nutrition. It's gonna be too many calories." And I'd love to hear just from both of you because, I know this, but I need to hear it from people, who run Body Kind Nutrition. Is it okay to put seasoning on your chicken?
It's actually illegal if you don't. But in all honesty, it makes me sad when I hear those experiences because they are very common and obviously they're varying differently on the spectrum of disordered eating and diet culture. But I find that there is this level of suffering that people think have to come with, quote, trying to be healthy. And it's very strange because at the end of the day, again, the health outcomes are not proven with intense restriction. We don't see any research that supports that. And again, it's actually really interesting because when we talk about the value of micronutrients, for example, things that you eat in a salad, they are actually better absorbed and better utilized in the body when combined with fat. And so I think that's another point as well, where our bodies, like I said, are really smart and they know what to do with food. And different things are broken down in different ways and absorbed in different ways and utilized in different ways, but they all play a role. And so if you're not getting in enough energy, if you're not getting in enough fat, if you're not getting in enough protein or carbs, your body's just not going to function at its highest capacity. And so it's just a really sad way for people to live. But in terms of like seasonings or even preparation of food, it's not that serious. Like, I'd rather people just eat it than not eat it. And if you want to put ranch on your salad, that's fine. If you want to fry your chicken cutlets, that's also fine. Like, it's not the end of the world. It's like, you're going to be fine, I promise.
And I'll be completely honest, I'm not eating it if it's not seasoned. And I mean that fully with my heart. And I know that has so much to do with my experience of being a Black American specifically, but I really feel a certain type of way when people do not season their foods and say salt and pepper should do it all. Okay, actually, we all ended up in this very weird colonial situation because y'all wanted to go look for spices and now you don't want to use them. How freaking dare you? Y'all done made all of this havoc in the world looking for cinnamon and turmeric and pepper, and you don't want to use it? Very weird, very odd.
Honestly, like, yeah, I always kind of forget even. That's like, yeah, like that's literally what we were doing. And yet, no, too much. That's too much. Like, it's so silly and so ridiculous. And, you know, we have access to all these different spices now and use them, utilize them, like enjoy the food you're eating in ways that feel good for you. And I know that person was not enjoying her lunch. I know it for a fact. So I'd love to know, like, what are some ways besides even spices can people start incorporating more self-compassion into how they nourish themselves and also how to move forward towards a weight inclusive approach to nutrition?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, and this is something that I preach with all of my clients, patients, however you want to refer to them, is that we need you to eat consistently throughout the day. So you need to have at least 3 meals and 1 to 2 snacks at minimum. That is the first kind of recommendation that I'm always going to have in terms of, oh, how much protein are you having? Are you having enough fruits and vegetables? All those things. All those things, of course, matter, but it's not going to matter if you're not eating consistently enough. And I would say 95% of people that I speak with on social media or that I encounter prior to working with them, most people are not eating enough. They're skipping breakfast. They're not having lunch. They're wondering why at 3 p.m. they feel like they're dying. It's because you haven't eaten and all you've drank was like coffee when you had something small. Your body needs to know that it's safe, and the only way that it's going to know that it's safe in terms of consistent nourishment is for you to eat at least 3 meals and 1 to 2 snacks a day. And if you're not sure how or what that should be, I would just say just start with anything, whatever sounds good. Sometimes with my patients who don't eat breakfast and they say, oh, I'm not hungry in the morning, it's because your body is really smart and it has cut back its communication with you because it's like, you haven't been listening to me, so why am I going to keep telling you that you're hungry when you're not going to listen to me? So it turns off those hunger signals. So I just say, just have some like toast with peanut butter and jelly, or toast with butter and jam, or just toast with butter, or whatever it is that you enjoy, just to put something in your system. Sandwiches, they're really great. I know we've gone through a phase where we think bread is the enemy of everyone and we need to just have salads or lettuce wraps, which those are all great too. But I think sandwiches are like the easiest thing anyone can make. It requires a little preparation. You could put tuna, you could put egg salad, you could put cold cuts, you could put whatever it is that your heart desires. Just really, really simple. So those are just like a couple of tips in terms of that. And I think really working on exposing yourself to food that you feel guilty eating. And I know that sounds really scary, but a lot of people feel a lot of guilt that they may not even recognize that they are feeling. So it might even be where if you think that you are, quote, trying to eat, quote, healthy, you avoid those things. And so I find that a lot of people don't even recognize their food preferences because they're afraid to eat. So whether it's French fries, whether it's pasta, whether it's bread, whatever it might be, if you make a list of those foods, try implementing one of those foods each week. And again, regulating your nervous system to not be afraid of eating those things and to recognize that you should not feel guilty for eating food unless if you do something really mean to another person or rob a bank or go on a living spree. Those are reasons to feel guilty. Eating food should not be one of them, and really just telling your body that it's safe and eating consistently.
Yeah, and I'll add that I think what really comes with that from the mental health and fitness perspective is really just planning it. Because a lot of the reason why people get overwhelmed with what they're going to eat is because they're trying to make the decision on what to eat at the same time that they're hungry and need to prepare it. And that it's just like overload to the system. So that's reasons that we provide the 2 recipes a week. And we came up to that place because we were like, okay, if folks are getting 2 recipes a week, that's between 2 and 4 meals, depending on how many folks are utilizing this. Like Eleni said earlier, usually it yields about 4 servings. Then that still gives them one more day to maybe decide to just do convenience foods, or they're going out to eat, or they're eating at somebody else's house, or whatever the other things may be. But knowing going to the grocery store to get the ingredients to get these meals, or I'm getting the groceries delivered, or whatever the access point is, and I'm going to make these meals. Now, when we get to the place where it's I'm hungry, eat, it isn't, oh, what can I eat? What can I put together? It's I got this stuff meal. Let me just boom and eat it and not have to go through those extra steps.
I love that. And also, even from an ADHD perspective, I really appreciate that because I always think I'm like, yeah, like ever since starting medication last year, there's like a spree of just in the middle of the day where I'm like too busy hyper focusing. Even without the medication, I still hyper focus where I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't eat in a really long time. Like, no wonder I feel awful. And it's interesting, Eleni, that you mentioned, that your body just kind of stopped communicating if you're not eating breakfast, for example, because I do think for such a long time I did skip breakfast. And I'm at a point now where if I don't have breakfast, my body is very much revolting against me now, which I'm so happy because it's telling me that. Like it's telling me like, hey, you did not eat. You have to eat. Like, if not, we are not going to feel safe. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I think also it's just such a misconception that there are actual health benefits related to skipping meals, and there really aren't. And I will say that there are a lot of people on social media that will cherry pick studies or statements from headlines and warp it in a way that makes whatever they're telling you make sense. Um, for example, PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, it's something that I have. It's something that I focused on in terms of my research for when I did my master's. And one of the things that I did was I took a look at all of the research for the past 10 years in terms of nutrition, like what is the best diet to follow for patients with PCOS? And the answer was throughout those 10 years, we need more studies because all of the studies were inconclusive, where we saw some benefits with something, some benefits for another. And so I think that just goes to show you that when you have someone on social media making blanket statements like, oh, save those calories for later, or oh, you don't need carbs after 3, they just come up with these things and there just really isn't any research that supports that. If there is a day where there are extensive research studies that show these things, I will be the first person to start implementing them in my practice. But until then, it's always better to eat than not eat and not obsess over what specifically it is that you are going to eat.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think that brings me to kind of my final question, which is really like if someone is feeling conflicted over different nutrition advice or just overwhelmed, like for example, seeing all these different posts that are, blanket statements that are potentially not true and harmful, where would you recommend someone starting when they're going on their journey?
I think it depends. It really depends on what it is. But I think it's easier for you to discern what you're seeing as being like harmful. So if you are hearing information that is in absolutes, I would say that's a red flag. Um, if you're following like a personal trainer or a dietitian or someone who is a nutritionist and they're like, oh, I can help you cure this, or I can help you stop this. Anyone, again, who speaks in absolutes, I'm just a little wary about. And that's not to say that in terms of my practice, majority of my patients do reach a point where they are in active eating disorder recovery, but it's always a process and a journey. And it's not like you just end up in one place and that's where you stay. And the same thing in terms of like your health. If you're looking to lower your cholesterol, just because, let's say, through medication intervention or through lifestyle intervention, that your numbers decline, does that mean that they're going to stay there absolutely forever? No, because our bodies are consistently changing. And so sometimes we might have to change up things that we're doing to try and get the same result, or lean in more towards medication intervention or whatever you name it. So I think it's much easier to recommend for people to take a look at who they're following, where they're getting their information from, and also see who is sponsoring the content that they're putting out there, especially when it comes to supplements. That is like a huge red flag. And I have had many companies over the years reach out to me to make videos or talk about them on the podcast or whatever. And I never do, because I don't trust any of them, because they're not regulated by any sort of external agency, and they could be putting whatever they want in there. And oftentimes they make these really crazy claims, and then you'll see like a little asterisk. And I always say, what does the asterisk say? And it says, consult with your physician, recommended along with diet and exercise. And so again, I would just be really, really wary about where you're getting this information from, who is benefiting from it, and using that as like a tool to discern what sounds good or not.
Yeah, I think, I would say we're definitely aligned in that. The first piece, what are the credentials of the individual? Because I think it is so common, especially for people like personal trainers, to be handing out nutrition advice left and right. And I've even seen personal trainers give their clients meal plans, which is not in our scope of practice. So that first piece is, what are your credentials? What makes you qualified to do this work? And then after, you are not qualified to do this work, then as Eleni said, are you speaking in absolutes? Are you leaving room for nuance? Are you culturally competent? Because I, as a Black provider, I know that I am culturally competent to other Black individuals, especially Black American individuals, right? But if I have a client come to me that is not Black, it is my responsibility as the provider to make sure I'm doing my best to ask them questions and not make judgments, but rather curiosity around, oh, they just said something that like maybe was a yellow flag about pork, but is that like, maybe we actually just need to dive into it and there's something culturally there that I'm not aware of. Or I don't know, cactus, for instance. My partner and I shop at a Mexican produce store, so they have options that our Mariano's, which is our local Kroger store, obviously doesn't have. Being able to be competent to all of that, ensuring that the people that you're trying to get this information from, are they trying to sell you something or not? Because if they're trying to sell you something, Andrew Huberman, they might be using their credentials in the wrong way. Because he's credentialed, but Stanford, like, we ain't got nothing to do with him. So it's where it has to be that both and situation.
Definitely. And, it just makes me think, because I am a certified personal trainer, but I don't have many other credentials besides that. So I know, at least in my practice, I give as many sources and citations as I possibly can, because I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't have, those acronyms at the end of my name. But then, of course, there are people who do, and they're just, misusing it in such a harmful way, which is so awful. But I am so happy that, and of course, neither of you do that. And you are based in the science, and you are creating a community that can just really support people in how they need to be nutritious to themselves in a way that works for them. So I just want to thank you so much for being here to join me today on the Body Talks. And if people want to learn more about Body Kind Nutrition and get in on this meal preparation program and community, where can they find you?
Yeah, so we are primarily on Patreon. That is where our membership is hosted. And we decided to put everything on Patreon because it allows us to have things behind a paywall, some things not. But also, being on the pseudo private side of the internet, I think allows for better conversation and curiosity and nuance than what most people would get on like TikTok comments, YouTube comments, Reddit. So you can find us on patreon.com/bodykindnutrition, but we also are on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. We are always happy to support individuals through the different tiers that we have for folks. We have a free education option. We have a slightly tiered, a little paywall, $5 a month education option, and then obviously the tiers that include the meal prep program itself, which is 2 recipes every single week that Eleni puts together, and then I just go through and check the spelling errors. And I'm not even really checking it all because I'm using Grammarly to help me catch them. But that's where you can find us, and we are absolutely interested with sponsoring events and working with companies, so folks are always welcome to reach out to us if they want to bring these types of conversations into their work environment as well.
Amazing. Thank you. I will have those, of course, in the show notes so people can check it out. And final question. What is a gentle reminder that you could share that can help people stay compassionate with themselves?
That your body size is not a problem. Like, to just release yourself from that concept. And I know that it's really scary and there's a lot of horrible information being pushed out there in the mainstream media, on social media, you name it. But just really recognizing that regardless of where you are on your health journey, whether you are interested in pursuing anything towards your health, that your body size is not a problem.
That's a good one. I really am going to take one that I saw from a colleague of ours, Caitlin, earlier this week on TikTok. And it was a reminder that consistency and frequency are not the same thing. And I think that is so important, especially when we talk about the ways in which we have our internal mental health talk, when we're picking out our nutrition, and when we're thinking about our fitness. Consistency is saying that it's going to be done over a long period of time, and that long period of time being our life. But frequency doesn't necessarily need to be a part of consistency. Oftentimes, folks will start something new, and then if they can't keep the same frequency, then they just stop doing it. And so they're not consistent at all. And we really strive to support our individual clients and our Body Kind Nutrition community. Remember that the frequency is not the same as the consistency. We want to keep it sustainable always.
Yes, I love both of those. Thank you so much. And honestly, just thank you, Ashantis and Eleni, to join me on the Body Talks. And what a wonderful conversation. So I learned so much. So I hope everyone tuning in did as well. Remember to drink some water, do something kind for your body today, and I will catch you on the next one.